Here's Harriet the teapot that was created in Adobe Firefly. Now I've actually flipped the image because that's the way that I want it into my composite image. And what I'm going to do is remove the background. And for something like this, I let Photoshop do the grunt work. And with the new updated version, what you've got is a toolbar now that you can easily click on and go remove background. But if you can't see this toolbar, what you'll need to do is go up to Window and choose Properties and turn Properties on, and then that will show you remove background. So what I'm going to do is let Photoshop do the grunt work for me and see what it comes up with. I'll click on remove background, let Photoshop do its work, and it's not done a bad job. Now as I zoom up, I can see some areas that just need a little bit of tweaking on my mask. So I'm going to zoom it back down, make sure I'm clicked onto the mask. I'll get my brush tool. Now as I zoom up, I can see that I need to get in some tight little areas. And to do that, what I'll use is a brush that's got some hardness on it. So I'm going to come up to my brush and I'm going to make sure the hardness is up a little bit so it gives me an edge. And I'll just zoom up here and I'm just coming in and masking off those areas. Now I'm not going to be too fussy with this because this is just a fun image. By making sure that brush has got some hardness, gives a little bit more of a hard edge. If you're using a soft round brush, then you've got feathering happening and you don't want something like that. So I'm going to come in and I'm just going to go through and fix the edges up. I'll zoom back down again, let's have a look. And I can see some areas up here where I need to get rid of that background. Again, I'm just making my brush smaller and I'm just going to get rid of those little edges there. There's a little artifact there that I don't want. And I come back and I just have a look around the image, get rid of some of the areas that I don't want. Make the brush a little bit bigger. Now I'm using a mouse at the moment. Normally if I was doing this as what I call a serious image, I would use my tablet, which gives me a lot more control. Let's just come over and we'll make the brush a little bit smaller. Get rid of those pesky little bits there. And I'll just undo, I've gone a little bit too far. And I can see some areas just here that will just make it hard when I put a background in there. And there's another one there, I'll make my brush smaller. And I am constantly zooming in and out when I'm working on a mask like this. And we'll just get rid of that little area there. I can see a little bit of green. Now one of the things that I do is to make sure that I've got no artifacts that just need to be tweaked out. I'll actually use a grey layer. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New, click on Layer. I'm going to make the blend mode soft light. When I do that, I get an option, fill with soft light neutral, 50% grey. Click into that. I'll go OK. And I'm going to drag that grey layer underneath the teapot. And with that grey layer, now I can actually see some of the artifact areas that I need to work on in my mask. So I'm going to click back up on my mask And I'm going to get rid of these pesky little bits that I didn't see on that transparent background. There's a couple just around up here. Let's have a little look. Now I'm scanning the image and I can see there's some there. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just fixing this mask up, and then we're going to get Harriet ready to actually put on a background. I've done my tidying up on the mask. I've got rid of artifacts that were left in the background when I got Photoshop to remove the background. I've also tried to tidy up the fringing around the teapot and the flowers. Normally I would take a little time to do this, but for the point of the exercise I'm not being too fussy. I've got it to a place where I'm happy with it. Now I want to put it onto a background. So what I'm going to do is click on the thumbnail in the layers panel. I'm going to click, hold and drag until I get to the tab where I've got my background open, and it's one of my sky textures. Now I'm just going to then click, hold and drag, place it in the middle and let go. And now it's actually put that on the background. Now my vision is that I want to have the teapot floating in the sky with a few elements. So that is why I've started with one of my textured sky backgrounds. Now it's not positioned where I want, and it's a little bit too small or big. Let's play with the composition of it. To do that, I'm actually going to use my transform tool. Now with the new version of Photoshop that's just been recently updated, you have the toolbar down here and you actually can click on that and you get your transform tool. The shortcut key is Control T. I'm going to grab the handle, just make it a little bit bigger, position it. I don't want it to be too big, but I don't like the way it's facing. So while I'm in transform, I'm going to right mouse click and choose flip horizontal. And now I have to recompose that. I'll click on the tick and I'll zoom up. And you can just see a little bit of the dark edging there, but as I said, for the point of the exercise, I'm not too fussed on it. But what I don't like about the image now, it's too contrasting. It looks like it's just sitting on the background. So one of the techniques that I use to blend the element in with the background is using neural filters. I'll go up to filter, I'll click on neural filters, and I'll use harmonization. I'll turn that slider on. I select my top layer. Now what you can do is put that into a new layer or a smart filter. I'll use a new layer and I'll click on OK. And let's have a look by turning that layer off and on. You can actually see that it's softened. Now I can see the edging down here on the bottom, and I'm going to do what I call a disguise with one of my elements, but it's the teapot that I want to sit on that background. Now as mentioned, my vision is to have it floating in the sky with some elements. It's a whimsical, fun image. Let's go and have some playtime and see what I can create. Now I'm ready to have some fun and position my elements. I've added the elements that I'm going to use for this composite. There's the rope, there's the flamingo, a bow, and another little bow down here which I'll use for my disguise at the base of the actual image. So what I'm going to do is click on the bow just down here, get my transform tool, and I'm going to position it here and drag it up. Now when I look at that, I don't like that. I'm going to right mouse click, flip horizontal, which just changes it. I don't like that. Let's right mouse click again and flip vertical, and that just gives a different look and it blends in. I'm going to position it so that disguises the base, and we'll just get it right there in that position, and I'll click on the tick. Now this is where I play with the blend mode and see what I actually can create with it. I'll go up to my blend mode. I'll choose soft light as the first one, which I don't like, overlay. Then I'll go down to luminosity. No, let's go to darken, multiply. Now multiply could work. Let's go to lighten. No, screen. This is where I experiment. I'll go up to multiply and I'm going to drop the opacity. Just don't want it too strong. I'm just getting it there. What I'm looking for is try and match that colour with that pink flower. Now that's one of my disguise techniques, so I'm happy with that. Now I want to position the ropes. So I'm going to click on one rope, do my transform tool, and I'm going to position it just in the spout. Now I'm going to give it a little bit of a rotate, and for this I'll zoom in really close and I'll just position there. Now I'll zoom out and I have a look, and this is where I can play and distort that rope. So I'm going to right mouse click and I'm going to click on warp, and let's see what I can actually get. Now when I use the warp tool, I like to have the grid on. I'm just going to point out where there is a grid, and you can have 3x3, 4x4 or 5x5. I tend to like 5x5. Don't know why, it's just something I've got into the habit. Grab one of the points. I'm just going to see if I can play with it and just make the rope actually look like it's distorted. It's blowing in the wind. And I'll reposition that. Might come up here, give it a little bit more of a twist. I'll click the tick. Now I see that it's moved. I'm going to get my transform tool again and just position that just there. All right, let's zoom out and have a look. I think that rope's a little bit too big. So again, transform. I'll make it smaller. I'll zoom up close and reposition. Might even rotate that a little bit. And there's my first rope. Let's go and click onto the next one. Transform tool. I'm going to position it just at the top. I'm going to see if I can flip it, see if it does anything. No, don't like that, so I'm going to come back to horizontal. I'll give it a little bit of a rotate, just there. Zoom back in. It's a little bit too tall, so I'm going to come back down here. And now I'm going to do another warp. Let's see what I can do with this one. So I'll just grab the corners. I don't have a formula for this. I just work with an eye and see what I can come up with. And let's see. I'll just click the tick and have a look. I'll get my transform tool again. Give it a little bit more rotate. Let's just drop that down a bit and reposition. And we'll rotate again and reposition. This is just where you try and get that balance. Sometimes you can go back and forth constantly. Now I want to do the next one, and I'll get my transform. Going to flip it and see if I can get a different look with that. I'll position now. I'm going to right mouse click. Let's try skew or perspective or distort. Let's see what we can come up with. I'll go with distort and we'll see if I can get something a little bit different. I don't like that, so I'm going to untick that. I'll come back to the transform. I'll position it. I'm going to flip it. And I'll reposition. And I'm going to go back to warp. Don't be frightened to play with different tools, just to get different effects. Now what I'm trying to look is a balance. And so I'm going to go the opposite way, and the reason that I did that was it had the same shape as this one here. And I'm going to just have a little bit of fun. And let's see, I'll do the tick. That's not too bad. I'll get my transform tool again. I'm going to make it smaller because it doesn't have to be the same size as all of the other ropes. And we'll just position there. So let's come and have a look. I'm happy with that composition actually. Now when I look at the bow that's underneath the teapot, I'm not happy with it now, so I'll come back and I'm going to drop the opacity just a little bit. I might even go to another blend mode. Let's see what I can get. Oh, that's interesting. And might go to that multiply, might drop the fill a little bit. This is where I just play. It is easier to do it now than later down the track. What I might do is actually put that fill back up, put the opacity up. I'm going to turn all the above layers off. And what I want to do is a hue and saturation. And I use the hue and saturation quite a lot. And I'm going to turn it into a clipping mask by clicking on here. And by a clipping mask, I'm only altering the layer underneath, not the whole image. I'm going to desaturate that. Do I go brighter or darker? Do I just trying to get a little bit of softness in that. What I might do is on my blend mode, on my hue and saturation, do a soft light, an overlay. No, I'm going to go down to soft light and I'm going to drop the opacity. And that's not too bad. All right, let's go back to the ropes. Now what I've noticed is that they're not positioned right where I actually want them, and I've just got that sitting there in the spout, so that's okay. If I have a look, I've got it sitting on the pedal, and I may not want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with that first one. Let's do a Control T, and we'll reposition just a little bit down. And with this one, I'm going to have a play with the blend mode. So I'm going to come up and I'll choose, let's go darken, no, luminosity. Now I tend to use luminosity when I want that sort of grey look, If I go up to exclusion, you'll see you'll get difference, you'll get different ones. So I'm going to go back to luminosity because I like that grey look. That brown just doesn't seem to fit in for me. So I'll go up to the other ropes and I'll do luminosity for all of them. So I get consistency. Now I can see that that needs to be moved, that top one. So I'm going to get my transform tool. And what I do just to nudge it down a little bit is use my arrow keys on the keyboard. And that gets it into position. And there's my ropes. Now I'm going to add the flamingo, and I'm going to put that flamingo on that layer, and he's going to be in place of balloons. So what I'll do is I'll get my transform tool. I am going to size the flamingo down and I'm going to move it on top of that rope. So let's zoom right up, have a little look. And it's not too bad on the sizing, so I'll click on the tick. What I want to do is add a mask, get my brush. I'm going to make that brush a bit bigger and I'm going to get rid of the legs. So I'm making him look like he's just sitting on that rope. I'll zoom up. Haven't left anything there. Let's have a little look at that. That's a bit of fun. Harriet's near the end of her journey now, and my original vision was to have Harriet floating in a sky like a hot air balloon, which I'm happy with the end result. The teapot was created in Firefly, and then I added the elements. But now when I look at the image, I think there's something missing, and I'm not too sure what it is. So when I get to that stage, I'll go into my stash library with all my graphic elements, my digital art, my cutouts from my own photos, and just look through the different folders to see if there's anything that can give me some inspiration. And I was looking in one of the folders that I have that's got water and waves in there. And I came across this element, and I'm going to turn that layer on, and that's exactly what I was looking for, but I didn't know it. So sometimes you have to play. Go in and look what you've got cut out or what elements you have, and that's when you can find inspiration. Now with this water, it was a photograph that I took of waves, and I've just put some brushwork on there to give it a little bit more of a painterly and a textured feel. Now I'm getting there. So then I think, well, what am I going to do now? So I added in the other flamingo, and then when I looked at the legs, I felt that they weren't blended into the water. So my next layer is where I did some brushwork, and I'll just come in, and you can see there's just a faint little bit of brushwork in there, and it's a waves brush, and so it just gives that illusion that the water's just wisping around the legs, if I can explain it that way. Then when I look at the image, I feel there's a disconnect with the flamingo on the right and the teapot. There's no connection. So I added another rope in, and then that gave the connection that I was after. It looks like the flamingo's towing Harriet along. Then I thought, I'm not too happy with the way the rope's just stuck on the neck. So, as you do, I added a bow. And that was in my secret stash of elements. But it's a bit bright. And I'll use this technique quite a lot on different elements. And all it is a hue and saturation. I'll turn that layer on. And you can see now it's just softened that pink. If I double click on there, you'll get the properties up for the hue and saturation, and you can see that I've just desaturated -3 and I've dropped the lightness a little bit. It's one of the easy techniques that I'll use. So let's go to the next layer and see what I've done. I'll turn the layer on, and what you can see is that I've added some more clouds into the sky, and this was done through a Photoshop brush, one of my cloud brushes that's in my cloud pack in the store. I'll turn that layer off, and I'll explain why I made that decision. Now, when I looked at it, I'm happy with the foreground, the water. I'm happy with Harriet and all her friends there, but I felt there was some blank or negative space up here in the sky, and it just didn't give an even look across the sky to me. So I brushed in the clouds just to give a little bit of depth. I'll zoom down and I'll turn that layer off and on. And just by filling in that negative space, it just gives it a little bit more context of the illusion of floating in the sky. Now I've got all my elements, I'm up to the colour grading. And this is where I decide, well, what am I going to do? Do I want it to be the colour tones that I've got now? Maybe I want to change it a little bit by putting a bit of cyan in or adding a bit of blue, or using one of my presets that I have that comes into Lightroom and Photoshop through Camera Raw. I'll turn that layer on and off, and all it is a colour balance. And so I'll turn that on, and you can see that I've just done a -11 into the cyan region, and that gives that subtle blue colouring coming through. Now I'm getting that tone that I'm wanting, because by adding that blue it makes the pink pop a little bit more without adjusting the colouring on the flamingos. Now the next layer is where I mentally, and it's one of the techniques that I use, is I want to soften it. And I can do this in several ways. I could add a Gaussian blur, I could go into Nik, I could use one of the Glamour Glows, but for this layer I've used Gaussian blur. I'll turn that layer on, and it's just a little hint of softness, and it just gives it that sort of what I call a dreamy look without being too soft and unfocused, if that makes sense. Now the next layer is I have an action that is done through curves, and I use this quite a lot. When you're doing elements, textures, a number of different techniques, levels, curves, your whites can flatten, and that's my technical term. So this action next here is where I reattach the highlights. I'm going to turn that layer on, and it's very subtle. It just gives a little bit more pop to the whites that have been flattened through all my processing. Now I'm looking at it and going, okay, I'm happy with it. Do I do some more colour grading? And so the next layer is where I applied one of my own presets, which is into the cyan or the blues. I'll turn that layer off and on. This was a personal preference for me. As soon as I tried the preset, I went, oh, I quite like that. I'm going to continue. Where other people might go, I don't like that blue, but that's fine. It's all about a colour choice. I've done a stamp visible layer, and at that point I was thinking, I'm done, I'm finished. But there's always a little bit more that you can add sometimes, and so I did. I did a levels, and I just brightened it up a little bit. I'll open that up, and so sometimes I just get the mid-tone slider and I move it left, right, just to see if it appeals to me. I'll undo that, and then we'll come into the next layer. This is a merge layer. I'm done. I'll wait one more layer, and I thought I'd use a vignette, and I use the darken and lighten center in Nik software. I'll turn that layer on, and so it just gives it a little subtle vignette. And there's Harriet with her friends, her adventure's over, and I hope that you've enjoyed her adventure as much as what I have, and that you've learnt some different techniques or some different thinking on to approach your composite imagery. Have fun being creative.